Elijah stood tall, his disciplined frame a testament to years of military training and self-control. The palace courtyard bustled with tourists, taking pictures and admiring the grandeur of the royal residence. Yet in the midst of this historic serenity, a single, loud voice disrupted the harmony. Mary, a tourist on her grand European vacation, had found herself irate. The incident from earlier, her blatant disrespect toward Elijah, was now making rounds on social media. Unbeknownst to her, the footage had reached millions within hours, and outrage was mounting. But Mary remained unaware, too preoccupied with her indignation and a misguided sense of self-righteousness. Elijah, however, was not the man to crumble under scrutiny. Behind the sharp uniform and impassive gaze lay a story of perseverance that few could imagine. Born in a small town, Elijah had always dreamed of serving his country. His parents, immigrants who worked tirelessly to provide him with opportunities, had instilled in him the values of dignity, hard work, and resilience. When he joined the Royal Guards, Elijah had known he would face challenges, but he hadn't anticipated the intensity of the scrutiny and prejudice that came with his position. Being one of the few black guards, he often found himself the target of stares, whispers, and the occasional outright hostility. Yet through it all, he maintained his composure, determined to honor both his role and his heritage. This day, however, felt different. As Mary ranted to anyone who would listen, a crowd began to gather around the courtyard. Some tourists were curious, others concerned, and a few were already live streaming the scene. Mary pointed at Elijah, her voice dripping with entitlement. "I paid good money to be here, and this man thinks he can ignore me," she yelled, oblivious to the growing disapproval in the crowd. A woman in her early 30s stepped forward, her phone still recording. "Excuse me," she said sharply, "but maybe you should educate yourself before embarrassing yourself further. The guards are not here to entertain you. They're here to protect the palace." Mary turned, her face flushing with anger. "And who are you to tell me what to do?" she snapped. The woman didn't back down. "I'm someone who respects people doing their jobs. Unlike you." The crowd murmured in agreement, and Mary's bravado faltered for a moment. But instead of stepping back, she turned her ire once more toward Elijah. "He slapped me," she cried, her voice trembling with feigned outrage. Elijah, still motionless, said nothing. The crowd, however, was not so easily fooled. A man in his 50s spoke up. "Lady, we all saw what happened. You slapped him, not the other way around. And let me remind you, that's assault." Mary's mouth opened and closed as she tried to form a retort. Before she could speak, a palace official arrived, flanked by two uniformed officers. The murmurs grew louder as the crowd parted to let them through. "Ma'am," the official began, his voice firm, "we've reviewed the footage and spoken to witnesses. Your behavior today is unacceptable. You will be escorted off the premises immediately." Mary's face turned ashen. But, but he..." "Enough," the official interrupted. "This is a historic site, and our guards are here to ensure its safety and dignity. Disrespecting them is not only disgraceful, but also punishable under the law." As the officers gently but firmly led Mary away, the crowd erupted into applause. Elijah remained still, his expression unchanged, but a flicker of gratitude crossed his eyes. Later that evening, Elijah sat alone in the guards' quarters. The day's events replayed in his mind, not with anger, but with a quiet sense of vindication. He knew his duty was to serve and protect, not to engage in conflicts. But today had been different. Today, the world had seen him not just as a silent figure in a uniform, but as a man worthy of respect. As he prepared for another day on duty, Elijah resolved to continue standing tall, not just for himself, but for everyone who looked up to him, everyone who had ever faced prejudice, and everyone who believed in justice. The incident would not define him, but the strength he showed in its aftermath certainly would. The fallout from the incident began to unfold swiftly. Social media was ablaze with discussions, hashtags, and debates. The footage of Mary's outrageous behavior had gone viral, and people from around the world weighed in. Some expressed shock and anger, others shared stories of similar experiences, and many hailed Elijah's composure as the epitome of grace under pressure. Mary, meanwhile, had returned to her hotel in a fury. She spent hours crafting a narrative that painted her as the victim of an unjust system. But as she scrolled through the countless comments and reposts of the video, it became painfully clear that her version of events was not being believed. The world had seen the truth, and her reputation was rapidly unraveling. Back at the palace, Elijah tried to carry on with his duties as usual. The royal guards were trained to stay focused, regardless of external distractions. But this was no ordinary distraction. Each time Elijah stepped into the courtyard, he was met with waves of support from tourists and locals alike. Strangers offered him words of encouragement, some even thanked him for his service, and others simply nodded in silent solidarity. The attention was both heartwarming and overwhelming. Elijah had never sought the spotlight. He was a man of quiet strength, someone who believed in actions over words. Yet now his story was resonating far beyond the palace gates. Meanwhile, within the palace walls, the incident had sparked a much-needed conversation. The royal family and their advisors had taken note of the public's reaction, and there was a growing consensus that something had to be done. Elijah's dignity and professionalism had highlighted the importance of diversity and inclusion within such a historic institution. The head of the Royal Guards, Commander Harris, called Elijah into his office one afternoon. The room was adorned with medals, certificates, and photographs, a testament to generations of service and leadership. "Elijah," Commander Harris began, his tone both formal and warm, "I want to commend you for the way you handled yourself during the incident. Your professionalism and restraint were exemplary." "Thank you, sir," Elijah replied, his voice steady but humble. "We've been receiving letters, emails, and messages from people all over the world," the commander continued. "They're inspired by your strength and composure. And frankly, so am I." Elijah shifted slightly, unsure of how to respond. He had always seen his role as one of service, not recognition. "The royal family would like to meet you," Harris said, leaning forward. "They want to personally thank you and discuss how we can turn this moment into an opportunity for growth and change." Elijah's eyes widened in surprise. "The royal family?" "Yes," Harris confirmed. "They believe this is a chance to showcase the values we stand for, not just as an institution, but as a nation." The meeting was arranged for the following week. In the days leading up to it, Elijah felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight, let alone sitting down with royalty, but he also understood the significance of the moment. This wasn't just about him, it was about representation, justice, and the need for progress. When the day arrived, Elijah donned his ceremonial uniform, its crisp lines and polished buttons reflecting his pride in his role. He was escorted to a grand chamber within the palace, where members of the royal family awaited him. The conversation was heartfelt and candid. The royal family expressed their gratitude and admiration for Elijah's conduct. They also acknowledged the broader issues highlighted by the incident and shared their commitment to addressing them. "We must do better," said the queen consort, her tone sincere, "and we must ensure that every person who serves this institution feels valued and respected." Elijah left the meeting with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew there was still much work to be done, but he also knew he had a platform now, a chance to make a difference not just for himself, but for others who looked up to him. Across town, Mary was grappling with the consequences of her actions. Her attempts to control the narrative had backfired spectacularly, and she was now facing legal repercussions for her behavior. But perhaps the most significant punishment was the public's rejection of her excuses. One evening, as Mary scrolled through yet another wave of criticism, she stumbled upon a letter addressed to Elijah. It was from a young boy who described how inspired he was by Elijah's courage and dignity. For the first time, Mary paused. The letter stirred something within her, an uncomfortable but undeniable realization of the impact her actions had on others. The aftermath of the incident reverberated far beyond the royal palace. Elijah's calm yet powerful response to Mary's aggression became a global phenomenon, symbolizing grace under pressure. The footage was shared millions of times, accompanied by messages of admiration for Elijah's composure and condemnation of Mary's behavior. However, this wasn't just a fleeting viral moment. It sparked conversations that were long overdue about racism, dignity, and the unseen challenges faced by those who serve in public roles. Elijah himself was overwhelmed by the sudden attention. He had always been a private individual, dedicated to his duty without seeking recognition. Now he found himself at the center of a worldwide discussion, hailed as a hero by people he had never met. Letters poured in from all corners of the globe, many thanking him for showing strength and restraint in the face of injustice. One particular letter struck a chord with Elijah. It was from a teacher in a rural school who described how the video of the incident had sparked a meaningful discussion among her students about racism and respect. "Your actions taught my class more than any lesson I could have given," the teacher wrote. Reading that letter, Elijah realized the depth of the impact his actions had on people he would likely never meet. Despite the positivity, there were challenges. The newfound fame brought scrutiny to Elijah's personal life. Media outlets dug into his background, eager to uncover details about the man behind the viral moment. Elijah, who had always valued his privacy, struggled with this intrusion. He began receiving invitations to appear on talk shows and participate in interviews, all of which he politely declined. He wasn't interested in fame. His focus remained on his duties and the values he held dear. Meanwhile, Mary's life was unraveling in ways she had never anticipated. The video of her slapping Elijah had made her infamous overnight. Her behavior was widely condemned, and she faced severe backlash, both online and in her personal life. Her employer terminated her contract, citing a violation of company values. Friends distanced themselves from her, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Mary's life, once comfortable and predictable, had been turned upside down. At first, Mary reacted with anger and defensiveness. She blamed the media for portraying her in a negative light and dismissed the criticism as an overreaction. But as the days turned into weeks, the weight of her actions began to sink in. She couldn't ignore the messages flooding her inbox, some hateful, others urging her to reflect on her behavior. One evening, Mary sat alone in her apartment, scrolling through social media. She came across an article about Elijah, detailing his life and the challenges he had faced as a Black Royal Guard. For the first time, she saw Elijah not as a faceless figure in a uniform, but as a human being with a story. The realization was jarring. Mary began to question the biases she had harbored and the values she had been raised with. In a moment of clarity, Mary decided to take responsibility for her actions. She wrote a heartfelt letter to Elijah, apologizing for her behavior and expressing her desire to make amends. She acknowledged that she couldn't undo the harm she had caused, but wanted to take steps toward change. When Elijah received Mary's letter, he was conflicted. He had moved past the incident in many ways, choosing to focus on the positive impact it had generated. However, he recognized the sincerity in Mary's words and saw an opportunity for dialogue. After much thought, he agreed to meet her under the condition that the meeting remain private. The meeting took place in a quiet room within the palace grounds. Mary arrived visibly nervous, clutching a notebook filled with notes she had written to prepare for the conversation. Elijah, ever composed, greeted her with a polite nod. "I want to thank you for agreeing to see me," Mary began, her voice trembling. "I don't expect your forgiveness, but I needed to tell you in person how sorry I am for what I did." Elijah listened patiently as Mary explained her journey of self-reflection. She spoke about the backlash she had faced, the lessons she had learned, and her commitment to change. She also presented him with her plans to work with anti-racism organizations, using her platform to educate others about the harm caused by prejudice. After a moment of silence, Elijah responded, "Acknowledging your mistakes is an important step, but true change requires action. Words alone aren't enough." Mary nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. "I know," she said, "and I'm ready to do the work." The meeting marked the beginning of a new chapter for both Mary and Elijah. For Mary, it was the start of a journey toward redemption, one that required humility and sustained effort. She dedicated herself to anti-racism advocacy, volunteering with organizations and sharing her story as a cautionary tale. For Elijah, the incident became a platform for change. The royal family supported his efforts to launch an initiative promoting diversity and inclusion within their ranks. Elijah also began visiting schools and community centers, speaking about the importance of respect, empathy, and standing firm in the face of adversity. The impact of their actions rippled across society. Schools implemented new programs to teach children about diversity and inclusion. Workplaces adopted stricter policies against discrimination. Conversations about racism, once avoided, became more common and constructive. Years later, Elijah stood before a packed auditorium, delivering a speech as part of the anniversary of the initiative he had helped create. Change doesn't happen overnight, he said, but every step we take toward understanding and respect brings us closer to the world we all deserve. The audience erupted in applause, a standing ovation for a man whose quiet strength had inspired a global movement. Elijah smiled, knowing that his journey had made a difference, not just for himself, but for countless others who believed in the possibility of a better, more just world.